Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Queens Chamber of Commerce Small Business Series. My name is Margaret Lang, and I am the co-chair of the Banking and Law Committee for the Chamber. My co-chair, Paul Harrison, Vice President of JP Morgan Chase, is unfortunately in a company emergency and couldn't join us today. So he is with us in spirit. You are all here to listen to the program on saving our Queens restaurant, navigating the rules of outdoor dining and the New York State Liquor Authority compliance. We're very excited to be doing this event. This committee is law and banking, and we've been dedicated during COVID-19 throughout June to all kinds of events on how to address issues like landlord-tenant, payroll protection, employment law, bankruptcy, and then we had accountants talking about how do you do forgiveness, how do you sanitize and get your business up to par for the governor's executive orders. And I wanted to do the restaurant hospitality industry, honestly, because I know it's paining and suffering so much. I myself personally am a foodie. I'm a VIP open table member who hasn't been able to use her VIP points. And I wanted to really talk about this so we can help any of the restaurants in Queens as the Law and Banking Committee just give out some useful information and advice. All this panelists today, we have an amazing panel. We'll give out their contact information if you have any questions that you'd like to follow up with after. I'm going to briefly introduce the panel and read their bios. I also want to give a shout out to the Hospitality Committee of the Queens Chamber, James Quint, who also worked with us on this event and was not able to join us today as well. So our first panelist is Andrew Riggi of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. I'm so happy that he's with us today. He has been a leader spearheading all of the representation for the industry during COVID and seeing how he could be a conduit with government and any other resources. Talking to him, he's a local Queens person, grew up in his family's third generation bakery, went on to the New York State Restaurant Association in 2004, and then in 2009 became the executive vice president. In 2012, stepped aside and was the founder and the CEO currently of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which represents thousands of restaurants and nightclub venues all over the 5 boroughs. In addition, Andrew also serves on multiple advisory boards. He's the chair of New York City's Office of Nightlife Advisory Board, the vice chair of Community Board 7 in Manhattan. He is a vocal industry advocate, public speaker, contributor in podcasts, contributing author to Forbes Total Food Service News. He is, and I'm a lawyer, so I usually talk about the rising lawyers. Well, he is city and state listed on 40 under 40 list of rising stars, the next generation of political leaders. And as he is well, Hunter College with their stars in New York City food policy recognition. He is also graduate at the Institution of Culinary Education in Manhattan. Our next speaker following will be Andrew Arcesi, who I'm very happy to have. I really leaned out in all effort to get the Department of Transportation to talk about outdoor and open space dining, which is pivotal to what we've been doing post-COVID. He is a borough planner at the Queensborough Commissioner's Office. Specifically, his day-to-day role has been covering the community districts and the office's lead liaison for open restaurants program, and has this amazing PowerPoint, which I've already previewed, to talk about how to do it, all the compliance, and what you need to know. Our third speaker will be Jonathan Bing, who is a shareholder in New York City and Albany offices of the firm of Greenberg Traurig. He is a member of the firm's National Government Law and Policy Group and has an active role in the New York hospitality law practice. I got to know Jonathan on an urgent matter where somebody's liquor license was being suspended, and he was so kind enough on a Friday to get on a phone call with me. So I know this is something that's very, very close to his practice. Prior to Greenberg, he served at the request of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo as a special deputy superintendent of the New York State Department of Financial Services, and previously was elected to a 5-year term representing the east side of Manhattan in the New York State Assembly, where he authored 36 New York State laws, including post 9/11 cleanup, healthcare legislation, and the no-fault divorce law. Again, he's within the hospitality field. He advocates for clients, local bars, huge hotel chains, and I'm just so pleased that he's with us today to talk about the ins and the outs of the SLA, which has been making the news in the media for the last couple of months. That's all you've been hearing about, specifically in Queens. He is also a board member of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce an appointed member of the New York City Bar Association Committee on Hospitality Restaurants, and a member of the steering committee of the Association for a Better New York, which I'm glad to hear because I'm a real estate attorney, and unfortunately everybody's been wanting to leave New York, and we need to sustain the economy and the real estate of what is our home. And last but not least, Katerina Skanderi, who I'm happy and pleased to join us today. When I found out she is the owner of one of my favorite restaurants on Bell Boulevard and Bayside, Taverna Colades, which has restaurants in Manhattan, Queens, and their flagship restaurant in Astoria. Very rated in Zagat's and honored through the New York City Hospitality Alliance in 2016. Her Andrea Skanderi began the family restaurant, and she's continued the family legacy. She has 4 children and her husband, and she is a standing member of the restaurant community. And I'm so honored that she's with us today because there's been a lot of transition because of COVID to keep the restaurants going. And she's going to share with us what her protocols and what how she's weathered the storm and navigated was the word I used in the title. We're also going to try to address what we think we can do better. What do we need to get to the governor and the mayor to talk about? And on that note, Andrew Riggi is going to be our first speaker. And I had just seen him on the news. At 12 o'clock, I was turned on ABC Eyewitness News. And there is his face in a window. And it was several windows, all advocating the same thing, talking about the possibility of indoor dining. I know Nassau has partial indoor dining given social distance. And I'm going to call on Andrew, but I'm first going to thank him for really leading the industry through this COVID and what's going on to be our new norm. Welcome, Andrew.
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me and hosting this. Big thanks to the Queen's Chamber, and really appreciate the partnership and all the work that all you do. You know, it's not a surprise to anyone, especially in the business community. Our local restaurants and bars in so many ways have been at the epicenter of this crisis. It's devastating what's happening. Restaurants are not only vital to the economic footprint of the city of New York, but also the social fabric. And there's no way New York City will ever recover unless our restaurants, our bars, our nightlife, our cultural institutions are at the core of that recovery. And we need support from all levels of government. As you alluded to just before, the organization I run, the New York City Hospitality Alliance, conducted a press conference earlier today, basically demanding a plan from Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio about indoor dining resuming in New York City. Restaurateurs here throughout the 5 boroughs had anticipated we would open up indoors back on July 6th. However, last minute, that was put off. To date, New York City has met, sustained, and exceeded all of the health metrics that have allowed restaurants throughout the rest of New York State to open up indoors. But New York City is not open indoors. Obviously, public health and safety needs to be paramount, but our decisions, our policies also need to be data and scientifically driven. Right now, you could eat indoors at a restaurant in Yonkers in Westchester County, but you can't walk 100 yards across the street into the Bronx and eat indoors. Same goes for Nassau County and Queens. You know, we need to ensure that our policies, as I said, are data and scientific driven, and that does not seem to be the case. And business owners need information to be able to plan. And unfortunately, right now, there is no plan in place. We're kind of in no man's land. Business owners need to know, should I even try to sustain my business? Should I keep exhausting my own personal savings to try to keep my business going? What do I tell my employees? You know, the enhanced unemployment ran up, you know, that need to generate revenue and income. So it's a really untenable situation in so many ways. We need our leaders to lead. We need guidance, and we need to plan. So even if they tell us, you cannot open tomorrow. Of course, they need to justify why it's different in New York City than it is elsewhere through the state, which I don't think there's been a compelling argument for. If that was the case, give us a plan. What has to happen in order for us to reopen? Otherwise, it just seems like they're discriminating against the state. We want to work collaboratively. we understand this is about the future of our city, the future of our state. We've worked very well with the Cuomo and the de Blasio administration on many policies. But this is just a real sticking point. And every day and I'm sure you and others have been hearing the desperate pleas from business owners who are just in the dark, and they just need to know what they are going to be able to do. Outdoor dining is fantastic. I know we'll hear from DOT. We've been an incredible advocate for the program. We've worked closely with the city on the program. But when we pitched it initially, it was intended as an offset for indoor dining. We knew we'd have a reduced occupancy indoors. So how could we make up for some of that lost occupancy using outdoor space? But now we don't have any indoors. And outdoors is subject to the elements. I mean, it was pouring earlier. What's going to happen in the fall as things start to get cooler? So we need guidance, we need leadership, we need support from all these levels of government. I think particularly about what is happening with indoor dining. And then also outdoor dining as well, not to put our friends DOT on the spot, but it's multiple city agencies. Are we going to be able to use heat lamps? I won't get into the weeds on that, but that's a whole issue that's top of mind for business owners. We're thrilled Mayor de Blasio announced the open restaurants program would come back next year in June. We hope it can come back earlier, but what's going to happen in the cold months? If there's not a plan, a lot of those restaurants will not be open to reopen in 2021 with outdoor dining. And then there's a lot of different policies at a federal level. We're really happy. Senator Schumer has signed on to the Restaurants Act, which is a bill in the Senate, U.S. Senate, and in Congress that would create basically a grant fund to give grants to restaurants to cover rent, payroll, vendor expenses, utilities, and other costs to help sustain them until we can get back open and operating. Because even 50% occupancy indoors is not going to sustain businesses long term. I mean, pre-pandemic, it was so difficult to operate a successful restaurant, even if you were busy and considered one of the successful operators. So this is an unprecedented situation. We need unprecedented, big, bold policies to help this industry come back. We got a cap on third-party delivery fees, which were outrageous, ranging even sometimes upwards of 30% per each order. The third parties for transacting the order were taking more money from each order than the actual restaurant was getting. Often they would lose money on the orders. The cap has been critically important. We just had a city council hearing earlier this week to extend that cap. We'd like to see it made permanent eventually. Also, we know the governor as well as a judge ruled that the moratorium on evictions appears it'll go until October. That's critically important. The city also enacted a law that suspends the enforcement of personal liability or good guy guarantees and leases. Again, critically important. We couldn't let small business owners not only lose their business, but then have a potential landlord go after their personal assets when these was totally out of their control. Restaurants, are not shutting or closing down because someone didn't like their burger or they had bad service. We've been mandated by government to be shut, and we need to demand that that same exact government enacts policies to support us while they are keeping us shut. So it's just an absolutely trying time throughout our society. I think restaurants, because people just connect to them, no matter what industry or what sector you're in. Our city, for it to come back, it's why the 70 million tourists come here every year to eat, to drink, go to our restaurants, see our culture, see our neighborhoods, why companies move here, or stay here or relocate here, because they want a vibrant restaurant and nightlife scene. There's so many reasons we are the fabric of our communities, but we're being torn at the threads. And we need help. We need policies. We put forth a blueprint that lists policies, everything from, minor penalties, fines, and violations that don't pose an immediate hazard to the public. Provide that small business with a cure period. Have an inspector go in, explain why something's a violation, how to correct it, give them appropriate time to fix it. And if they don't after that, well, then maybe issue a violation. So there's a whole list of different policies, but we need not just talk. We need action. We need it fast. Otherwise, it's going to get worse. And I guess I can leave it at that. I'm happy to answer
Well,
any
I wanted
questions.
to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
Last week, I took Michael Stoller, because I'm a real estate agent. He
Yeah.
interviewed all the hospitality people, which has been a heartache.
Mhm.
The Asian Bar has our huge gala in February for 2,000 people at Cipriani. So we're at the point that, we're fighting over the down payment right now.
Yeah.
But we do have some people on this that I know I invited them that have huge catering places. I wouldn't even embarrass them, but they are on the line. Hospitality, same issues, right? I know you're
Yeah.
familiar with it. They've got canceled events. They got to
Mhm.
hold it together, right?
Yeah, I
Difficult.
mean, listen, caterers are in a particularly difficult
Yes.
spot, as are nightlife. We
Yes.
represent bars and nightclubs. I'm the chair of the city's nightlife advisory board, which was established a couple of years ago. They're even more far off than
Yes.
restaurants are. I mean, when it comes to places where you dance, like I don't know who's interested in socially distant dancing, but it doesn't sound
It's
like
true.
the best time. And people plan weddings and events far out. I mean, you mentioned your organizations at big annual events. So these businesses, I don't even like to say are worse off, but in some ways they're reopening realistically to a capacity that could potentially sustain them is even farther out. And frankly, they need a plan
Yes.
too, and they need support too. And I just think, we need to galvanize. Everyone needs to come together and says,
Good
listen,
point.
if we can't open right now, you need to justify it and you need to provide us a plan so we can at least plan ourselves. But yeah, it's a dire situation. Look, the city will come back. Our industry will come back. Right now, we need to figure out how we can save as many of these businesses along this journey because there's going to be a lot of unfortunate loss. But how do we mitigate it as best as possible? And that's going to take leadership and that's going to take policies. It's not just going to take saying, we love our businesses, our restaurants, they're the fabric of our community. It's actually going to take policies behind it.
Well, thank you for advocating and continuing the fight for us. Okay, I really appreciate. I really appreciate. That's actually why I had you start the conversation. I knew you would invigorate everybody on this panel. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Next is Andrew Arcesi of the Department of Transportation, and he's going to present his PowerPoint on and how the city has been addressing. I think I'm getting it right. Outdoor dining and open sidewalks. There's two different maybe things that you could explain. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thank you, Andrew, for the primer and just setting the stage there. So just again, myself, I'm Andrew Arcese from DOT. I'm in the Queensborough Commissioner's Office. My day-to-day, I cover community boards, a few of them in Queens pretty directly, but I've been tasked with kind of being the liaison for our open restaurants and open streets restaurants programs here in Queens. So. Just to many of you are probably familiar, but this program basically was created, as a response to help restaurants recover and remain open and have outdoor space for dining. And it's been largely successful. Obviously, every single business may have differing experiences so far. But we have almost 10,000 restaurants now registered and certified to do this, and many of them have been inspected and visited multiple times, even from inspectors from the city, to make sure that the setup is in compliance and safe and according to the guidelines. And we've been working that out. The beginning was quite a flurry, but a lot of locations have adjusted real well, and it's been moving quite along. Next slide, please. So just to go over the guidelines and the criteria that's needed. So you can have options to place seating on the sidewalk or in the roadway or both, depending on your exact situation and your frontage. The sidewalk, the main criteria really is that there needs to be an 8-foot clear path for pedestrians to pass by. And we're asking for 3 feet from an adjacent business. So if you picture two businesses side to side, you have 3 feet, 3 feet, that's 6 feet from tables sitting next to each other. And just, main gist there is that the clearance is really important. Don't want to block those water connections or utility hardware, as well as bus stops, because if a bus stop got crowded and you have a table and chair right there, that wouldn't be ideal. And then for the roadway, this is something a little more complicated, especially for locations that have challenging or maybe perhaps confusing regulations along the curb. And I'll get into that in a moment, but just in terms of the actual setup itself, there needs to be a protective barrier on all 3 sides. This barrier needs to be continuous, so it can't really be made of like makeshift materials and with gaps and whatnot. We've seen a lot of setups with cinder blocks and planters maybe, but it's just not continuous. So we really are asking that it's continuous and at least 18 inches thick in width, as well as 30 to 36 inches in height. And that excludes plantings. If it's 36 inches and then you have maybe a nice little garden on top, something like that, that's fine. But I mentioned no gaps, and then the seating itself is supposed to only be in front of the business itself, or anywhere that the storefront is on the street. That frontage, it can't exceed that. That's a common complaint we have. And those barriers also should have reflective tape as well. It says yellow here in the presentation, but really just anything that's really reflective and allows, especially in the evening hours, a driver passing by, bounces off for high visibility. A ramp must be provided for ADA compliance. So for customers who have challenges accessing the seating area, this will enable them to get over the curb. This can be made in makeshift materials such as wooden plank or something like that. It needs to be on site. As long as it's available readily, that should be fine. And one thing that we've heard a lot is restaurants will say, well, I'm located right in front of a fire hydrant. What can I do? Well, if you have sidewalk space, then you can have seating on the sidewalk. But unfortunately, in the roadway, 15 feet needs to be maintained clear from that fire hydrant. So that's something that we want it to be flexible with, but it is a safety concern in the event of an emergency. And then there should be seating 8 feet away from a crosswalk, as well as it shouldn't be within a no stopping or no standing zone. Basically red signs, like like the red background with white letters typically means it's no good. And one common question we get is like, well, this no standing sign is only in effect for 3 hours out of the day. What do I do? So the answer to that would be you can have your seating there outside of those hours, but you would have to remove it during that time. So it's often like 4 to 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. You would have to remove everything from the roadway. That includes the seating as well as the barriers. But then you are allowed to put it back when that time is over. One thing to note too, on locations that don't have no stopping or no standing zones, and it's just a regular curbside lane, maybe metered parking or alternate side parking, the white sign, you can leave your barriers out overnight. But the seating itself must be brought in and taken away, because we don't want folks to be gathering, outside hours that are active as well. And I mentioned those signs, but then also just no seating in a bike lane or in a bus stop, taxi stand, car share space, things like that. It's really just metered spaces and non-regulated spaces essentially. And then in terms of umbrellas, in the beginning, we had a lot of questions about tents as well. Weighted umbrellas are fine, and tents are fine as long as they follow the manufacturer's installation instructions. And I believe the Department of Buildings also issued some guidance on this as well, in terms of, I want to say 400 square feet is the max, which is, that's quite a large space. So most folks don't usually have that question about the size. And then lastly, the city is not providing tables and chairs and barriers that must be brought on by the applicant or the restaurant. And then here's what this looks like, just a sample. It's, you know, obviously every location is different, but this just gives an idea of what a typical frontage would look like. You have seating up against the wall near the business on the sidewalk there. Try to get that as close as possible. Most cases, you know, you won't really be able to fit more than one or a couple here and there up against the actual business itself. Make sure that 8 feet is maintained. But then looking out into the roadway setup, I mentioned that the seating can be there. I forgot to mention though, 8 feet from the curb is the furthest out you can go. That's our typical parking lane width. That's about the width of most vehicles, close to 8 feet. So that's how far out you can go. And just notice the barriers there, they're continuous. They have reflective tape. An ADA ramp is provided. And the example also shows 15 feet from a fire hydrant, as well as, you know, you could use an umbrella. It doesn't show the tent, but as mentioned, you can use a tent. And also 8 feet from the crosswalk is important for turn radius purposes. So here's an example of a location that's compliant. The image doesn't show all the elements, but just gives you an idea. You know, it's a little tough to see the reflectors. Those are on the ends. And then the frontage itself, we had this, it appears to exceed, but it's in line. But that's just an example. Some restaurants opt to use something a little more visually appealing. That's up to you. As long as it meets the main criteria, you're good to go. And then here's a couple examples of a non-compliant setup. As you can see, you have seating there. It's unprotected. You don't really have any barriers. You have just those couple buckets there with tape or rope to delineate. It may delineate the space, but it does not serve adequate protection for the diners. So that is something that we highly stress. And a setup like this would get served upon an inspection, would be served a notice to correct. And I can get into that a little later on, but just an example shown right there. So in terms of applying, on our website at nyc.gov/open restaurants, you can find all of this information, and there's a lot there. There is really a lot there. This has been continuously updated from the start, and we even have translations. We have documents available in multiple languages, like a brochure kind of that can be printed out. It can be emailed, distributed. You can even post it on site. You know, things like that for employees who maybe don't know the specifics of the program. So those are all things that we have. We have frequently asked questions section as well on there that also is available with translations. So I highly recommend visiting this and really going through all of the criteria before applying, just because, you know, it's a self-certification process. The idea is that restaurants are familiar with all of the rules and understand them. There's a box. You got to check, I agree, I understand. So that, you know, if there is an inspection later down the line and something isn't up to the standard, you know, maybe it can be easily corrected. Oh, I must have forgot, you know, what we can work around this, something like that. Next slide, please. So I already mentioned the open restaurants program. That's just for individual restaurants in front of their actual frontage. But the street in that case still remains open to traffic, just like normal. Another program that we have here is Open Streets Restaurants. Kind of synthesizes our Open Streets program and the restaurants program, where it allows for a full block closure of the street, so no traffic. And by doing that, it allows restaurants to expand their space that they're using for diners out into the roadway a little further. They're still supposed to use the space that's just in front of their frontage, and we'll have a diagram in a moment, but it allows a little extra space And the program operates on weekends, Friday evenings, as well as Saturday and Sunday when traffic volumes are typically a little lower. So it makes it a little easier to close down the street. In terms of applying, community-based organizations are encouraged to apply, such as local bids, your chambers of commerce, things like that, but also a group of restaurants can apply. There must be 3 or more on a block. I stress that because we've gotten a lot of questions. We have one block with one restaurant. They really want to do it. They want to close the whole thing, but the department is mandating that there's at least 3 on the block itself to justify this closure. So, but a group can apply, and the number there says 47 corridors currently participating. I think it's a little more now. But we're seeing it in all 5 boroughs, and they tend to be along your prime commercial corridors. So Bell Boulevard, great examples. I think our first one in Queens, or one of our first ones. We have Austin Street, another one off the top of my head that I just remember. And they're vibrant. They're vibrant on the weekends, and it's a great opportunity to expand. So here's just an example. I believe that's Washington Street in Dumbo. And as you see, there's a little more space. Notice the clear path running down the middle. That's a 15-foot wide clear path. That's for emergency purposes. It allows emergency vehicles to get through in the event that it's needed. And then just expectations from the partner themselves that applies. We expect that there's coordination with any restaurants that are participating, that they're well aware of the plan and the just the setup and whatnot. During the application, the partner is expected to provide a diagram kind of showing what they're looking to do. It'll get a little more intimate as working with the team. But the partner is also expected to do some of the outreach, so making notifications to the surrounding area, maybe the community board, and then managing just the barricades themselves to stop the traffic, and basically just setup of any tables. Tables are generally expected to be provided still by the restaurants themselves, but if the partner, a lot of times partner works that out with those restaurants too. There's sometimes opportunity to help out there. So, and then just keeping the site clean. That's something we really ask to be done as best as possible. We can't throw this all on our colleagues at Department of Sanitation afterwards. But yeah, those are the general expectations. And then this pertains both to both programs, the requirements of the actual restaurant or food service establishment. It must be registered with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. So, and they must serve food too. That's another thing. We've got a lot of questions. Oh, I'm a bar. I don't have a kitchen. Can I participate? And unfortunately, that is not allowed at this time. They have to also have food. And yep, as I mentioned, applicant will provide all equipment. So here's an example of what an open street restaurant may look like. This is a 2-lane roadway, or two-way street, I should say. But as you see, there's if you're looking at the business frontage, they typically would not be able to extend all the way to, it's almost the center line there. But this allows them just to get a few extra tables out there and work around it. If there's one thing to note, if there's a bus stop, so that's a lot of restaurants, they say, oh, I have a bus stop, I can't do this. Well, if you have an open street treatment, because the roadway will be closed, that bus stop will no longer be active. So then that would allow you to set up in that bus stop or beyond that bus stop. And then if you go to the next slide, unfortunately with hydrants, we still need to maintain that access. You see that down in the middle there. But generally speaking, I mean, it allows a little extra space, and not every street's going to look like this, right? They're not all this wide. They're not all going to have the emergency lane running down the center. So that it's going to vary by location, and that's just something to keep in mind when submitting potential plans. So then the application process itself, you can go online and put this in on that same page I referenced before. And it initially gets reviewed by DOT, but we also send to NYPD and FDNY and maybe any other relevant city agencies that may be affected by this. We want to make sure it's clear and emergency services are well aware. And then there will be contact from DOT to the applicant, basically to work out an agreement, make sure everybody's on the same page, and also make sure that those restaurants that are participating are self-certified and they have signed up for the actual program itself. And then once that's all checked out, the program can start, once it's all approved. And I mentioned Friday evenings, it's 5 to 11, as well as Saturdays and Sundays, I believe 10 a.m. Or it might be 12 p.m. rather, to 11 p.m. So yeah, there it is. So, and for more info about the program, just go to nyc.gov/open restaurants, and you can find tons of info on both programs there. And then for any questions and concerns, I think it's 2 slides next. This one's a thank you. Just another shot. I think I want to say, not sure exactly where that is. I think Lower Manhattan, but just, yeah, if you have questions, so those 2 emails there are from my colleagues in public spaces. It's a unit that's been spearheading this program. That's Kyle and Andrew Ronan. You're welcome to reach out to them directly, and you can also reach out to the Queensborough Commissioner's office. That's my office. I'll read out my number. I can also post it in the chat, but that's 212-839-2510. Again, I'll post that in the chat, and just you could always reach out. And then if there's any complaints about open restaurants, please utilize our web form online. If you just go to Contact DOT, you should find that pretty quickly on our site. Other than that, thank you.
Andrew, thank you. I think I'm going to put the questions in front of you now, but I think you might have just answered it. Somebody had the question that you said there were 10,000 registered certified citywide. What does that mean? Is that what you just went over, the registration certification process?
Yeah, so
okay.
You want me to address that now?
Yeah, go ahead. I'd like it easier.
Yeah, so with 10,000, I don't think we're actually at 10,000 yet. It's like 9,700 something, but yeah, that pertains to citywide. Those are the number of restaurants that have applied and been approved for this program. The approval is instant.
I was going to say, what's the turnaround time for it? Like if you apply?
It's basically instant.
Oh, wow.
You put it in. There's a number of questions on the application that'll say, are you located in front of a no standing sign? Are you in a bus stop, et cetera, things like that. And that'll kind of filter out whether or not someone would be eligible for like the roadway seating. Or, and not everyone's honest. I'm not gonna lie, you can lie on this, right? And get that approval, but you will be inspected.
That's my next question.
There will be an inspection.
Yes. Okay.
And anything that's not in compliance, they'll be asked to correct.
So it might be the same person because it doesn't have their name on the question. So what kind of enforcement for non-compliance?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So our inspectors, they go out, and some folks on this call, I'm not sure, but and may have experienced this already. The inspectors come out multiple times, and It's not always the same inspector. It's not always even the same exact agency. I mean, it's on behalf of DOT, but we've worked, especially in the beginning, to get a lot of different inspectors out there as soon as possible to make sure things are safe. And the first step is they would take a look. Anything that's not there, they'll usually talk to someone on site, if there is anyone on site at the time, and say, hey, you have to correct this, this, and this. Sometimes it's easy to do right on site, right in front of the inspector, and usually that wouldn't result in any issues from that point on. But if things, let's say the barriers, great example, the barriers are too small or they have gaps, they'll be told you need to correct this. It's, I think, a 24-hour notice.
Mm-hmm.
The inspectors aren't always back out 24 hours later, but they do come back for a follow-up. And if that correction isn't made, they may be served a cease and desist and asked to stop participating in the program. Most of the time it doesn't get to that. Usually folks can work something out by then, but that's something that's
And
possible.
then this probably is the same individual. How many violations have you issued? I mean, I don't think, I don't know what, that's a very broad question. When did you issue them? And what's the most popular violation?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, in terms of specifics, I wouldn't know, but
Exactly.
we've inspected nearly, I don't want to say every location, but thousands. We've inspected
Wow.
thousands, and there have probably been, a large number of locations that weren't in compliance, but then a lot of them adjust, as I mentioned. And the most common ones that we've been seeing are issues either with the barriers themselves, either the not being continuous or missing reflective tape. That's a very common one. And then also just providing that ADA ramp is
Right.
often.
Yes. Okay. Oh, hold on. One more. Let's see if this is the same individual. All right. We'll talk about this one later because Jonathan was. Thank you so much, Andrew. This was a good PowerPoint. Really good and informative. Jonathan, you're on next. And Jonathan will be talking about State Liquor Authority. And since we're on the subject of inspectors, while I was watching Andrew Ridgey on the news, they came up after with State Senator Jessica Ramos, who's really on a roll right now, that the SLA, and you could see it in the ads, they've been looking for deputy inspectors to go out on behalf of the SLA now. And I guess, she made this remark. She wants the SLA to stop deputizing every Tom, Dick, and Harry to go out and do an inspection because the fines can be up to $30,000. So I'm sure you faced this phenomenon before. Yeah. So you can comment on this.
Yeah, I will talk about enforcement of both
Absolutely.
the open streets and the SLA towards the end of this. But since we're already nearing the end of time here, and I want to make sure that Katerina has a chance to talk about her experience, I'll go pretty quickly. First, just want to give a general disclaimer that nothing I say during these comments should be perceived as legal advice. Every situation is very fact specific, so just want to make that disclaimer. And I will post my my email address for questions after the program is over. Also, I usually post updates on what's happening with hospitality law to my LinkedIn. So feel free to send me a LinkedIn connection request for updates as to what's happening in this field. As Margaret mentioned, I'm a shareholder of Greenberg Traurig, a former state legislator. I primarily involved in New York State and New York City government relations with a specialization in liquor and related licensing. We are part of the third largest firm in the country, law firm in the country, and that breadth allows us to handle all aspects of the liquor license process, not just the SLA licensing, but community board work, city agency troubleshooting, land use, real estate employment, all those things. And in Queens, I've represented a number of restaurant chains in their liquor license process, including the Queens locations for Buffalo Wild Wings, Hooters, and Chuck E. Cheese. Of that group, the one that you think would have the most community opposition is not the one you think. It's actually Chuck E. Cheese, for a number of reasons we want to get into now, but there's a surprising number of incidents that have occurred at Chuck E. Cheese's around the country. So that actually got more community opposition than Hooters. State Liquor Authority rules that I'm going to talk about are currently in effect until September 4th, 2020. They may be extended. I expect they will be extended, but they could also be altered. So what I'm telling you now is what is in place from now until September 4th, and I will post on LinkedIn when it's extended or changed. With regard to the State Liquor Authority and consumption in outdoor areas, the consumption of food or beverage must occur in the outdoor open air areas, not inside, without a fixed roof besides a temporary or seasonal awning or cover. Food or beverages can only be consumed while seated at a table, though there are to-go exceptions, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but it has to be eaten at a table, drank at a table, bar, counter, or similar, with tables spaced 6 feet apart, and any seat or a bar or counter must also be 6 feet apart. Staff are required to wear face masks at all times, and customers must wear face masks at any time that they are not seated with regard to the alcohol consumption. And it's the licensee's responsibility, as you would expect, to follow all the necessary laws and regulations. Licensees can use any uninterrupted outdoor open air part of their existing premises. If the existing license has restrictions on the outdoor space, then the licensee must obtain a letter from the responsible party, such as the municipality, approving the use. Within 5 days of receiving approval, the licensee must submit an updated diagram to the SLA. And I should mention that everything, the SLA is a state liquor authority, so everything I'm telling you applies both in New York City, Buffalo, wherever the state these rules are applicable. In terms of the actual seating, patrons of the same party may sit next to each other in a bar areas or communal tables, provided the party is 10 persons or fewer. Patrons of different parties must be separated by at least 6 feet, whether at bar stools or tables. Restaurants and other food and beverage establishments with an SLA license are only allowed to offer on-premises music if their license certificate specifically allows for such activity. So when you applied for your liquor license, you had to check off what kind of music you were going to have, and your license was approved with that restriction. So whatever that was then, it still is now. You can't augment your music choices because you're now outdoors because of the different situation that we're in. And again, I'm picking and choosing these with the rules I'm telling you. There are plenty of other rules. That's why, please feel free to follow with me. I mentioned that the state during the pandemic is also allowed to go and delivery of alcohol, which is new for New York. Licensees are able to sell for delivery or take out alcoholic beverages that they're licensed to sell on the premises. So if you're licensed for beer and wine, you can sell beer and wine. If you're licensed for mixed drinks, you can sell it. Alcohol beverages can be sold in any size container, but it has to be closed or sealed for off-premises consumption, to go or delivery, provided that it's accompanied by a food purchase and is consistent with municipal open container ordinances. Andrew mentioned food purchase. What is a appropriate food purchase is a matter of discussion. A bag of chips is not. A full meal by a restaurant, by a bar that has a full kitchen is. There was a big controversy in Buffalo as to whether buffalo wings constitutes a meal such that it would allow for beverages. I think that in Buffalo they finally conceded that they could not get away with not making wings appropriate as a meal. But so there is no bright line, but chips is not, full meal is, and use your judgment and what's like that. And licensees that are with specific off-premises selling privileges that are not subject to the food requirement, according to their license, don't have to now sell food. For instance, if you're a North Fork winery and you allow people to buy bottles and take them with them, you don't now have, and you don't sell food, but your license allows that to happen now. You can still do that. Delivery of alcoholic beverages may be made through SLA-approved methods, such as a third-party service, or a vehicle owned and operated by the licensee or its employee. You have that if you're using your own vehicle, you have to keep a copy of the permit or license in the vehicle when you're delivering the alcohol. And then alcohol beverages can be sold during the same hours of operation as set forth in the license that you currently have. The presentation on open restaurants was fantastic, and I do a presentation on that too, and it covered everything that I would have said. A couple of things I just want to, for a practitioner point, take pictures of your restaurant so that if there's a dispute later as to whether you did something or didn't do something, you have that evidence. You use a camera, an old school camera that has a timestamp if you have one, but at least if you're taking it with your phone, there's going to be a timestamp on it. The fact that you have self-certified doesn't mean, and Andrew mentioned this, doesn't mean that you're done. It doesn't mean that the DOT or all the other agencies are going to say, oh, you self-certified, we're good with it. I have clients that have self-certified. And again, they were not being dishonest. They legitimately believed that they were following the rules. But DOT later said, no, you shouldn't have self-certified. It's not actually, what you did was appropriate. So again, the fact that you're gonna apply, you'll hit the button and you're gonna get this almost immediate approval doesn't mean that later somebody might not find a violation. So don't rest on the fact that you have that self-certification. You still may receive a violation later. Having those pictures showing that how you believe that you've satisfied the regulations is helpful. And also, it's always good to have a manager on duty at all times. whether it's say a liquor authority issue or Department of Health, Department of Consumer Affairs, FDNY, whatever it is. I have a number of clients where they were following the proper laws and procedures, but the person who was, sort of the manager on duty, even may not be at a manager level, told the inspector something wrong that was actually incorrect information. That had they known that what the correct information was, they would not have been received a violation. And those things can later be overturned. But again, you want to make sure that, especially now where you're going to have likelihood of inspections, that somebody is on site at all times who knows the answers to all the things that we're talking about and can provide the correct information, just so you don't have an issue later where somebody on site told the wrong information, and even though you had been doing everything correctly, told something wrong, and then you're cited for something that you shouldn't have been. And a number of questions had to do with the enforcement, so I want to talk a little bit about that now. So the SLA has issued hundreds of violations to date. For instance, in the first week of August, for example, the SLA issued 6,887. They did 6,887 compliance checks. So they visited almost 7,000 licensed establishments in New York and issued violations at 162 establishments in the state of New York during that first week of August. 38 of those 162 violations resulted in emergency summary suspensions requiring an expedited hearing for the SLA to maintain a license. So while 162 out of 6,887 is a pretty good record, it's a pretty low number in terms of violations, considering that everyone's sort of learning these things as they go along. But of the 162 violations, 38 of them caused the immediate shutdown of the restaurant. So if you do get a violation, the chances are relatively good that it's going to be perceived as something severe. The fines for the SLA are up to $10,000 and the suspension of license. And also with regard, I don't have the numbers specifically for the open restaurants program, but the enforcement of the open restaurants program, as somebody asked before, is a complaint-based process, so that restaurants will be inspected after an employee or a guest calls 311 or something like that to inform the city that an eatery is not observing the proper guidelines. And the violations can be subject to fines or other enforcement. And also chronic violators of the open restaurants entitlement may subsequently get the liquor license revoked as well. Let's see. I want to talk a little bit about, again, there is a 3 strikes and you're out policy with regard to SLA violations, though, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, some have actually received closure orders despite not having 3 strikes. It was on their first strike. As was mentioned before, the inspectors may be deputized from other city or state agencies. As Margaret mentioned, the SLA is looking for state employees or others to sort of, become an inspector for a time. So in the city, for the Open Streets program, you may get a DOB inspector, Department of Health inspector, special enforcement inspector, the sheriff's office, and all of them have the ability to cite you for a violation of the DOT's open restaurants programs or Department of Health guidelines. So in terms of, I want to give some examples of enforcement before going on, Katarina. So as of August 12th, 130 establishments around the state had their liquor licenses suspended during the pandemic relating to these regulations we're talking about. And 46 of those statewide 130 establishments were in Queens. So Queens is a big percentage, maybe about a third, more than a third of the establishments that have been shut down, lost their liquor license during this pandemic have actually been in Queens. And here are some examples, just to give you sort of a flavor of what is causing the SLA to shut down establishments. A Jackson Heights sports bar observed selling alcohol without food at 4 separate tables outside the restaurant in violation of food guidelines. Jackson Heights sports bar selling alcohol without food at 3 separate tables outside the restaurant in violation of the guidelines. And also they had a karaoke machine where people were drinking and standing without facial coverings. That business was a repeat offender. College Point Restaurant, where 15 patrons are observed standing, congregating, and mingling directly outside the bar while consuming alcohol, ignoring social distancing, and not wearing facial coverings. I'm not mentioning any specific names of restaurants, but one I will mention, because it's received a lot of press, is the Beer Garden at Bohemian Mall, which was shut down after investigators had warned them to not allow for the standing consuming of alcohol. Then they came back with a task force, and 20 people were found standing and drinking in the establishment's outdoor area. So again, the establishment is objecting to the findings, but that that is one probably the most high-profile Queens shutdown. Restaurant in Astoria, where 15 patrons were observed drinking and congregating without facial coverings. A Flushing hookah bar, where 12 patrons were standing on the sidewalk outside the bar, drinking without facial covering. So you get the idea. So none of these are situations where there was an aggressive, or where people were trying to buy. We're taking a MAGA stand against facial coverings, or purposely trying to say we don't care about the law. These things are relatively minor in the sense of obviously anything that potentially exposes people to illness is something that's serious. But again, these were not situations where the restaurants were actively trying to to snooker the government officials and pretend they were doing something. And again, it was simply not wearing facial coverings, standing too close, being inside the premises when they shouldn't have been. So again, but just as something to keep in mind is that these situations are not where necessarily when an establishment is trying to violate the laws, or actor saying we know what the law is and not doing it. These are relatively simple situations where the state liquor authorities come down very hard and require and close the bar and are requiring them to come before an emergency hearing to get the license open again. So I will put my information in the chat. And again, thank Queens Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today as a member of the board of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce. I know how important chambers are to the life of the borough in which I serve, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Jonathan, thank you so much for all that valuable information. And I want to tell the audience, as you know, in the age of drones and iPhones, it goes quickly that someone can get all that evidence on a photograph. They're not happy with the establishment. But thank you so much. I think you answered a lot, because I'm looking at the attendance of who called me that wanted to be here, and I think you've answered a lot of people's questions. Thank you so much for joining us. Katerina, I did not forget you. I want you to speak to your experience as a restaurant owner, what you've gone through with COVID, and how have you, I hate to use pivot, it's overused, okay? We're not gonna use pivot. How have you transitioned in the new norm to get your restaurants? I know you have more than one, and how are they doing? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me, and thank you, Andrew, for all the advocating that you've been doing. It's priceless. Honestly, it's those hospitality emails have been like
Yes.
just consolidating so much of the information for us. It's been hard. So we always have a line, and one of the things that we always did in the past was hand out glasses of wine to people while they're waiting to kind of, help them out with their waiting, but we can't do that anymore. So now it kind of, you're losing customers because now you can't kind of hold them in anymore. And also simple things like some of our seafood is imported. Once the borders closed, we couldn't get some of that stuff. So we're already operating at the beginning of quarantine with a limited menu. And now by default, we have to condense that even more. And then simply finding gloves and masks and just the supplies that you need to continue were always a challenge at the beginning of this COVID. But I have to say that I did change a few practices that we had, and I feel that it may have benefited us, which we probably wouldn't have done had it not been COVID. Instead of handing out menus now, we have placemat menus, which is individually used and disposable, and people feel like it's their own clean space. We also, when everyone sits down before we take their order, we ask them if they want some hand sanitizer, just to kind of set the tone. We've always prioritized safety and health and fresh food, and now it's just reassuring our customers visually that we're doing that. We've always done it. It's something that we believe in. So it's just getting those supplies to maintain that standard is what's been one of the biggest challenges. And with the open restaurants, I feel like the information came out so quickly and we all rushed to comply, but then there was like a slew of inspections that came and you weren't in compliance because the regulations changed so quickly. So now now that we're in compliance and everything is the way it should be, it's nice to have that space to utilize for sure.
I'm on the Bayside Merchants with Ed Probst. If there's anything, I think you belong as well, but if there's anything I could do to send a message, because I've always been saying that we've got to unify, given the situation, all the merchants and everything more, you know, and on a good, Katerina, if you haven't reached out, the Queen's Chamber is helping with all the PPP masks, whatever we have to give to our small business members and other members in Queens. So let us know. Okay, well, I'm listening to this, and you know, we're here to help. We're here to help one another. How have you found your neighbors? Have they been complying, or do you? I see you are when I drive down Bell Boulevard. At least your Boulevard, you've got a beautiful sidewalk and out onto the curb. How have your neighbors been? Do you see them?
I have to say, we are very fortunate. We have the best neighbors. Like everyone
good.
worked as a team. Yeah, one of our neighbors, he's the one who found us the planters when like there was no landscapers that had it. He was very quick to jump in and give us his contact. And we look more uniform. Like our side of the street, everyone kind of has the same planters. We all kind of have this. So they've been very helpful. And if someone hears like, oh, the SLA is on the boulevard, everyone kind of spreads the news quickly. Everyone's, you know, we've been, that's the other, like there's a camaraderie that's formed that I feel like wouldn't have been had it not been.
It was kind of funny.
Situation.
The Michael Wang is the co-chair of the Real Estate Committee Chamber, and he posted it all over his LinkedIn that he walked down Bell Boulevard and hadn't been down there in a while, and actually filmed the whole thing going down, that it was like utter disbelief and shock. But he's one of my millennial colleagues. He cursed a couple of times that it was being filmed. It's on, saying how beautiful Bell Boulevard is. Yes. Is there anything you'd like to put, I mean, because you're people listening, is there anything you'd like to say as a restaurant owner that we can help you with? I want to say it that way. And I addressed that to Andrew. I thank him so much. And that's one of the questions that I put out there. What's the message that we can try to get out on behalf of the restaurant community right now?
Yeah, I again, the indoor dining would be ideal. Thank you, Andrew, again for advocating for us. And that's it. We just keep supporting your local businesses because we're here. We've always been here, and we're going to continue to be here.
Well,
I would just add to Katerina, you know, when you look at a restaurant like Taverna Cyclades, I mean, these are the types of restaurants that make New York what is so, they make New York, frankly. I mean, it is such a beloved institution or institutions, since there are a few of them. And these are the exact types of businesses that we need to support, and the people that work there. I mean, you know, yes, the wine, I remember waiting in line and you'd hand out the wine, and now obviously, you know, people can't do this. They're so friendly. I remember my daughter was, you know, very small. Someone would always kind of like run around and say, okay, we'll get you a table quicker. Like, these are the types of places that like know you and like care for their communities. So you got to go out and support them, whether it's eating in their outdoor dining, doing takeout, delivery. And I'd say even if you're not in the restaurant industry, contact your elected officials. I mean, I know Jonathan was in office and they always get bombarded with calls, but reach out to your council members, your assembly members, your senators, everyone, and tell them how important this industry is to you, even though you're not in it, and you need to pass policies to support them. I mean, really, everyone needs to pitch in a little bit to help these places. So, well,
I want you to laugh, Andrew, because I pitched this to Tom Gretsch, and I just haven't had time. But I think we should pursue this to get, since Jonathan's at Manhattan and you are too, and Brooklyn's are very active, and get all the chambers on one big event and talk about this and try to get in front of all the important people. I think that would be an amazing message that we have to do right now. But I know we're running over and I don't want to keep all of you. Thank you everybody for joining this panel. I did look in the audience. We do have restaurant members, and I know they appreciate all the good things that you shared with us. Andrew Arcesi, thank you from DOT. Your PowerPoint was amazing. Katerina, thank you for sharing. And I do miss going to the restaurant, but now that you're outdoors, maybe I'll stop by Bell Boulevard. I've been working remotely, haven't been down the office much, but thank you for joining us. Andrew, keep up all the crusading you do for all of us. We appreciate that. And let's not forget Jonathan. I don't see his window, but I know that he does a good job representing all of the hospitality and restaurant people that need for him to go there and speak on their behalf.
He's the best. Jonathan. We love John, and thanks for all you do in the chamber, and say hi to Tom and the team.
Exactly. Thank you, everybody. And if anybody in the audience has questions, just get it to me and I'll get it to the panel. Okay? Have a great day, everybody. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye-bye now. Be safe.